So, last night there was a terrorist attack in England, particularly in Manchester during an Ariana Grande concert. Obviously, this is a delicate issue considering how it was later revealed to be ISIS as always. So what did prominent conservative YouTubers Hunter Avallone and Paul Joseph Watson do in response? Did they A. Wait long enough until they could properly separate the emotions of the Manchester attack with their own feelings? B. At the very least, try and mix their own emotions with some amount of reasonable policy that would not completely remove freedom of religion? Or C. Just try to make you afraid in hopes that you're willing to give up your freedoms for safety. You know, Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who trade freedom for security deserve neither." And I'd think that, two big-time conservatives, especially Hunter Avallone, since he actually lives in the U.S., would be big on the Founding Fathers, but guess not. What I'm saying is, I don't remember an asterisk next to that Benjamin Franklin quote, and then underneath it said, "except in the case of Muslims." We're going to start with Hunter Avallone's video, since his video was basically just a 5-minute rant, talking about how we need to address Islam, which we've been doing for how long now? Gee, ever since ISIS started. In fact, ever since Al-Qaeda started, honestly, and the Taliban, but don't tell them that. It's Watson's video where the real meat is. And that's why we're going to spend most of this video discussing Paul Joseph Watson's video on Manchester. Paul Joseph Watson claims that the most basic role of government is to protect its people. I already talked about how the Founding Fathers would disagree with it, but he's in England, so I am willing to excuse that. Although, you think someone who was so against, say, the EU or communism would understand the importance of a combination between freedom and security, and not just have all security, because then, you gotta sort of leave freedom to the wayside, I guess. Hey, you're safe under communism. Granted, you tend to starve to death instead of being attacked by a Muslim, so I guess that's better. Oh, and you can't speak out against the government because, well, but hey, you wanted security. He says society should ask which one they value more, that being protecting the feelings of Muslims or preventing children from being blown up. He presents this false dichotomy. Now, let's see. First off, pretty much anyone would agree that, the people who cause terrorist attacks should be arrested. In fact, that's what they're doing. But this isn't about protecting the feelings of Muslims. This is about protecting freedom. That's it. And Paul Joseph Watson is presenting it like, oh, we can't just protect the feelings of Muslims. No. We can't. We have to also protect freedom of religion. And Paul Joseph Watson doesn't seem to have a solution to how we can have both freedom of religion and stop radical terrorism. He says that ways we can stop this include doing things like surveilling hate-preaching mosques, which I find odd considering how he got on Macron for supporting surveilling French citizens' Skype conversations. But it's okay when it's only done to Muslims. He also supports solitary confinement, which is a cruel and unusual form of punishment. Now, I can understand supporting mass surveillance in prisons. It is something that I myself do feel is at least somewhat reasonable. However, solitary confinement is downright, well, inhumane, and cruel, and unusual, and completely would go against the Eighth Amendment if it was implemented in somewhere like the US. And should I go on? He also supports more vetting for Muslims in general. Now, don't get me wrong. If we're just talking about countries like Iraq or Saudi Arabia or most places in the Middle East, I could definitely understand and even sympathize with Paul Joseph Watson's position. However, he doesn't say specific Middle Eastern countries or even just the Middle East. He specifically says Muslims. Makes you think. Now, don't get me wrong. There are specific ways I think we can help stop Islamic terrorism, such as adding more vetting processes from specific Middle Eastern countries, and in the case of the US, stopping giving money to Saudi Arabia. In fact, the state of Saudi Arabia is something me and Paul Joseph Watson agree heavily on. However, Paul Joseph Watson is not making these specific complaints. He's instead talking about Muslims in general. So there is no difference in his mind between someone from Saudi Arabia and someone from Michigan. Hey, both are Muslims. I can't tell the difference. And, specifically saying Muslims, which is a religion, is kind of anti-freedom of religion. In fact, it seems like you're trying to make people afraid of Islam in order to give up their freedoms, aka causing terror for a political purpose, which is terrorism. Now, don't get me wrong, Paul Joseph Watson is nowhere near the level of ISIS when it comes to terrorism. However, you still cannot deny that according to the literal definition, what Paul Joseph Watson is doing would still count as terrorism. He is trying to make you afraid so you will give up your freedoms. That's it. I'm Ephrom, and good night.